Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. I'm the author of 4 books in philosophy, one of which is The Defining Ethics, Good and Evil, and they're free for viewing at thephilosophicalangle.com. If you'd like to, if you like this episode, give us a comment and hit the like button and subscribe if you will. Along with me is my colleague and co-host, Rick Samuelson. Rick graduated from Yale and has MBAs from Wharton and Tufts. He's an independent venture capitalist out on the West Coast. Good to see you, Rick.
Good to see you.
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the nature of concepts and ideas in current media. And this week we're going to inquire as to why the liberal Democrats are against abortion. They're against pro-abortion and family values. So family values, they would probably say that they have their own family values, but they're a little bit different from conservative family values, in that conservative family values probably are individually oriented and core family, nuclear family oriented, whereas the liberal Democrats want to help families and their family values by governmental programs. And they're also for abortion. And kind of have to ask yourself why. It's really not pro-family if you're for abortion. And they typically call the Republicans evil. So why call us evil when they're for abortion? So what's going on here? We need to explore really the nature of between the left and the right in order to understand what's going on here. And so let's do that. So in society, if you go back and understand the origin of politics in society, it doesn't happen until there arises within any society somebody superior to somebody else, a chieftain, a king, a queen. Somebody rises to the top, and somebody always will rise to the top because it's because of two factors, two principles of life. And first is the first dictum of life, that we all seek that which is good for it and continually seek that which is good for it, good for life. And so naturally a chieftain or a queen or a king or a queen will rise to the top, because when you rise to the top, you get to acquire more assets and more goodness for your life. And so that's the first dictum. And the second dictum is we're going to refer to is St. Augustine's principle of libido dominandi, and which says that we have a will to dominate. And this is confirmed in anthropological studies too. So kings and queens evolve, and they are we're going to call those the haves. And as they evolved, the other class of society at the time would be the have-nots. And so that's the origin in all politics. That's the very start of it. And after the kings and queens in society begins to expand and population expands, then you can add the kings and queens need the nobles to help facilitate their policies in society. And in modern day democracies, and we're actually in modern day countries throughout the world, the nobles and the king and queen and their nobles and their associates are replaced with government bureaucrats. And even more recently, they're replaced with corporate management, as corporate management is starting to turn left. And they are all needed in order to control the have-nots, and particularly corporate management is needed because these have-nots pay taxes, which we should probably call tribute, and in order to keep the kings and nobles and their associates and the presidents and the government with money in order to be able to for them to have what they need to do in order to control the have-nots. And they believe that they're doing the right thing because the nature of the people in the low class and the have-not class, these are the serfs, the proletariats, the slaves, and they believe that the Democrats believe that people of this low class, of the serf class, are inherently bad, that their nature is not good, and there are those at the left that are they believe that the have-nots are born this way, that they are inherently bad, and but there are some that in the have-not class, that in the worker B class, in the slavery class, they're not content to be in the bottom, in the serfdom, and so they want to break out, and they try to break out of their lower class, and they do this, and when they do this, they created the middle class, and the left tolerates this because the middle class pays more taxes. And so it'd be thought, it's considered by the have-nots that these non-cooperative ones that want to break out, their nature also is inherently bad, and so they need to be controlled. And when they need to be controlled, the Democrats, for another reason, and we're going to call it the Lord Acton principle, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what happens there is that when the more you gain control of a class of people, the more you have less respect for them because you no longer have to cooperate with them. If you don't cooperate with them, you lose all respect for them, and which is the nature of ethics. That it's the appropriate dispensation of respect is the nature of ethics, and so they lose respect, and they also lose the ability, the will to behave ethically toward the very bottom. And you can see this throughout history. The lords and the kings have treated the serf class horribly throughout their history. But then what happened is that they got so low is that a couple of revolutions broke out, and heads rolled, and suddenly the kings and queens realized that they cannot treat. There is a limit to how badly they can treat the lower class. And what happened? Another concept evolved out of that, and that was noblesse oblige, and which is thought by the kings and queens that they do have an obligation to give the serfs, the proletariat, the slave class, at least a reasonable life, a bare minimum life, to be able to live their lives. Otherwise, they rise up, and they don't want that to happen. So they understand, and we're going to call that one of the 5 principles that of politics, and which is the noblesse oblige principle. And so now that they realize that there's a standard by which they have to give the lower class, and control that lower class, and this means that when they have that lower class, noblesse oblige teaches them that they just have to give one, and that everybody is just equal in all cases through that lower class. And when they're all equal, then they can be controlled, and they don't have to think of the individual person. They only think of the whole class and give the same to everybody within that class. And then, because they have no respect, as we mentioned, then they don't have any empathy for the advocates of the individual rights of anybody who jumps out of that class, and then they come up with words like deplorable to be able to describe the lower classes that they govern. And you end up with a caste socialism situation. And from this we can conclude, we can deduce why they are uh, pro-abortion, because they look not at the individual but as class. They look at people as a within a class and not as an individual. And so when you look at it as a class, they don't see that there's an individual loss of life in a single abortion. They only look as whether the whole class is healthy and whether it conforms to what they are obliged to give in the principle of noblesse oblige. And so that's and the same with family values. They don't look at the individual values that are being placed. They look at the whole class of the lower class. And so enough of me speaking about this. So let's find out what Rick thinks about the Liberal Democrats and family values. And Rick, what do you think?
Let me offer a somewhat darker interpretation. I think you need to consider the real end game here, and I believe the end game is totalitarian control. And conservatives always need to bear in mind that the left is already thinking 2-3 steps ahead, whereas conservatives are always fighting a losing defensive battle on multiple fronts. What appear to be multiple, somewhat unrelated issues, like it doesn't seem that climate control or climate change hysteria, which is what it is, should be consistent with allowing for more immigration. Why would you want more people in the country polluting more? By definition, if you have more people, you have more pollution, right? It's a pretty simple analysis. Yet, dig a little bit deeper and you find that, well, immigrants overwhelmingly vote for Democratic politicians. So we have to encourage that if we're ever going to be able to take over, the various state legislatures and consolidate their control. So they are quite happy forming these hybrid, seemingly inconsistent policies that marry the broader goal of achieving a totalitarian controlled society with pragmatic, frankly, tactical policies that will enable that. And you see this manifested in many forms. So a long-term project of the left has been to destabilize and ultimately remove mediating institutions in the United States. This is the stuff that Tocqueville noted in his classic piece that really differentiated the United States from Europe, right? The presence of, the Masons, the importance the church had, the, Rotary clubs, the Boy Scouts, all this stuff that has a long and distinguished history in the United States and presented an alternative means of organizing society and indeed promoting certain principles like self-determination, self-reliance. And, what they have done, thanks to the civil rights movement, actually, is they've been able to marry a strategy of framing every debate they want to win in terms of some form of right. And some of these are, extemporaneously manufactured, frankly, with an endless siege of lawsuits against the organizations that they want to remove, undermine, diminish, or what have you. And the Boy Scouts are a classic example, right? So they managed to actually destroy the Boy Scouts by the seemingly incompatible notion that, okay, well, there are 86,000 plaintiffs that have been molested by Scout leaders, according to the various depositions, and at the same time, we have to force the Boy Scouts to accept gay Scout leaders. Well, how do you, at any logical level, how do you marry those two concepts? Well, this comes down to tactics. They must destroy the Boy Scouts while at the same time asserting these, frankly, manufactured rights. And again, this all is a function of an approach they've used ever since the civil rights legislation was, quite successful in reducing outright discrimination, particularly in the South. And it's, frankly, it's worked like a charm. The third element to this is that they work from out of the institutions where they've already achieved control, right? That they control the education system. They control the federal government. Irrespective of whether they're Republicans or Democrats in office, they control the administrative state in the federal government and many state governments. So that is their most powerful, these are the most powerful tools, right? And they go back to them again and again. So it's easy for a conservative to say, well, actually it's game over. Even if we win back the presidency, even if we increase our dominance of at least some state legislatures, at the end of the day, the cards are so stacked against the conservatives that, particularly because they control the media and all the information flow, high tech, they control all of that. They're actively censoring. The federal government doesn't intervene, which is remarkable. And if this were happening in a communist country, of course there'd be worldwide uproar, complaints, and we've seen that in the past. But it's happening here now, and you get a shrug of the shoulders from the federal government, which is astonishing and frankly unprecedented. But there is some cause for hope in this, what is coming out of this COVID, frankly, manufactured crisis, which is less about people dying than about the government gaining more control, which is why I don't think they're going to let go of it anytime soon. I think, there'll be variant-based lockdowns. We've already seen that, right? The stated goal of cutting off all travel to the UK and Europe and Brazil and so forth was to protect the United States from the variant. Well, you can count on almost an infinite number of variants to suit that purpose whenever it's convenient to use it, right? And we could have numerous vaccine developments going on simultaneously to try to deal with all these variants. So it depends on how far they want to take this, but the precedent's been set, so one can, by default, frankly, expect them to use that precedent over and over again when it's convenient. It's the path of least resistance. But the reason I'm somewhat optimistic is I think parents that have had to deal with this dysfunctional school system we have now, which is failing miserably and not teaching kids effectively online, they're already resorting to alternatives. In some cases, private schools, in many cases, homeschooling, in other cases, forming these pods, and they're seeing that their kids are being indoctrinated, and whereas they weren't, frankly, completely aware of it, because the curriculum has been changing gradually. It's like a frog boiling in water over many years. History's been rooted out, any reasonable, factually based history anyway, and certainly anything to do with traditional physics has been essentially rooted out of the school systems. And they don't like it. They don't like what they're seeing. And so I think that there's the beginning of a counter movement that will, at least in the conservative states where I think many people will be fleeing now going forward, you're going to see a return to, frankly, more traditional learning. If you go back to the formation of British colonies, right, for a couple of hundred years, there really wasn't much of a school system. And you ask yourself, read their wills, read their letters. These were educated people that didn't go to school. So how is this possible? Well, they were taught at home. They were taught to read the Bible. They were taught to read some of the classics. People were literate, and in many cases, more literate than individuals coming out of the high schools today.
Yes, absolutely true.
Standards were higher.
Right.
All right. The distractions were fewer. And so you don't need, in my view, the existing monstrosity of, that they call the educational system in the United States to educate people. The online resources are exploding. The options we have are far greater and far more efficient and cheaper than anything we've ever seen before. I think every parent over the next 10 years will wrestle with whether it is necessary or financially sensible to send a kid to college when the expense of it is so outrageous.
Right.
They're all making these calculations, or they do the first 2 years at home online and then maybe do 2 years at a college. I mean, there'll be all manner of variations and options offered on this front. And once the left starts losing control of an organ that is as vital to their strategy as the educational system, that really spells trouble. So they will fight that tooth and nail. They will fight any effort to homeschool. They will fight any effort to form charter schools. They will fight any effort to allow for an alternative to the colleges, tooth and nail. They will fight this with everything they have. But the economics are too daunting. They outprice themselves, right? The cost of delivering even a high school education in the United States has risen to, I think, an average of $12,000 or more per student. Our private Christian school for my daughter is $8,000. Do the math.
Right.
Everyone can do that math. And the fact that the economy is vastly worse than is being reported publicly, and the unemployment or effective unemployment is vastly worse than is being reported publicly. And I know people that are at their jobs not being paid, yet they're employed. They're not being paid. They're doing it because they want to ensure the survival of their business. If that's employment, okay, right. Well, that's a technical definition of employment. Let's put it that way. So unemployment, structural high unemployment is going to come with its own complications for the left, because they don't have an answer except to pay people not to work, and then eventually you run out of money. other people's money. So they're on a collision course with other fundamental trends, and at the margin, they're going to favor going back to the well over and over again, namely these lockdowns and periodic lockdowns and centralized government initiatives, and frankly beating up the small business owner because it suits their other goals. But in the long run, people are rational.
Well, you're right. Your picture of present society is fairly dark. And but let's thank Rick for that. And if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. Thanks for viewing, and we'll see you shortly in the next episode of The Philosophical Angle. Rick, see you later.
Thank you. See you.